right, welcome everybody. So thank you for joining us here on the Pamunkey Regional Library's Facebook page. I am Kate Emmenheiser, and I am the librarian and branch manager at the Mechanicsville Branch Library. So tonight we are very fortunate to have Kris Waldherr here with us. So Kris is a woman of many hats. She's an artist, she's a writer, she's an illustrator, she works with tarot. So Kris, welcome. Thank you so much. I know we've had some scheduling issues in the past, and I'm so happy that we finally were able to get you on for this great presentation tonight. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm so thrilled it worked out, because last time I was out in the wilds of Pennsylvania on a writing retreat, and the Wi-Fi was just so fluky. But here I am, and it's the first day of autumn, which means it's time to start thinking about spooky things, which I like to think about spooky things all year round, but autumn seems to be the season. So I'm here to talk about the Gothic novel, and I've given presentations on the Gothic novel, but this time I was telling Kate I'm trying something a little different, and I think it's going to be fun. I'm going to talk about Mary Shelley and the history of Frankenstein, along with about the origins of the Gothic novel and my theories about how the Gothic novel has become so compelling for us. And I'm going to have a little exercise at the end for those of you who maybe want to write your own Gothic novel. So I'm going to begin with some screen sharing. And here we go. All right. And is the screen share is up, I assume? Yeah, is it working? Oh, yay, there it is. Bravo. All right, and don't you like my pretty graphics? It's like, you know, I may be a writer, but I have to make everything beautiful. So this is the rise and return of the Gothic novel. And the reason I called my presentation this is because the Gothic novel is there's a lot of cycles in the way that people become interested in the Gothic novel and they're not, and it just seems to come and go. But we're now in the midst of another return, if you will, of the Gothic novel, which it feels like it's kind of gotten bigger than ever. So I'll be talking about that. So this is a little bit about me. As Kate has said, I have had a number of different genres, if you will, that I've written and illustrated. I've started out as a children's book illustrator, and then I became a writer. I always wrote, I always illustrated, but I received a full scholarship to art school, so I thought for the longest time, I'm meant to be an artist, and I kind of put my writing on the side. And then eventually the urge to write came back, and now I consider myself more of a writer, though I still make art. So here's some of my books. The first one is Doomed Queens, which if any of you who are fans of Six the Musical, you will love this book. I have all the queens in there, except for, of course, the one who survived, Catherine Parr at the end. And the Book of Goddesses, which was kind of, I think, probably my most popular book, which became the Goddess Row, which you can see at the end. And Bad Princess, which is a follow-up to Doomed Queens, but for middle school girls and boys. So those are some of the books. But I'm also a novelist. And this was my debut novel, which you can probably guess by looking at the cover. It is a Gothic. It has all of the signature visual representations of the Gothic. There's the mysterious figure, the purple type, which hopefully doesn't reflect purple prose, but who knows. And I was pleased that the book received a Kierkegaard review, which was thrilling to me, and it was named a Crime Marine's Best Book of the Year. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my interest in the Gothic and where it originated. It's hard for me to recall ever not being fascinated by the Gothic. I was that precocious kid sneaking into the adult section of the library. I read the 19th century greats like the Brontes and Shelley's Frankenstein, as well as the mid-20th century Gothic authors such as Victoria Holt and Daphne du Maurier. Growing up in suburban New Jersey, I just really yearned for a life on the moors where I'd live in an old house crammed with secrets and ghosts. The irony is that I now live in an old house, but I live in New York City, so it's not quite the same as being on the moors. But we do have some ghostly visitations. In particular, there's a spot on my stairway that seems to be a draw. Members of my family have seen out of the corner of their eye like little flutters of shadows, and my cat avoids that corner. So I think there's something going on. Anyway, all of these experiences and interests led to me writing a Gothic novel of my own, which came out, and you can see it there. And since then, I've written 2 other Gothics, which hopefully will be published in the next year or so. As far as my own favorite Gothic novels, I adore Jane Eyre, which I consider kind of a feminist ur-text, if you will. More recently, I adored Sarah Perry's Melmoth, which was inspired by Maturin's Melmoth the Wanderer. I'm a huge Sarah Waters fan, and she's written several Gothics of her own, and especially The Little Stranger. And I can confess that her novel Fingersmith was one of the novels that inspired me to start writing a Gothic of my own. And if you haven't read it, read it, but don't start it at night because you will not be able to put it down. For those of us who love Gothics, there's been a rush of newly written Gothic novels in the past few years, but I'll talk more about that later. For now, it's important to remember that the Gothic novel has been around since the mid-18th century, over 200 years, 250 years, if you will. Though Gothic in the genre has ebbed and flowed, like I said earlier, in the years, it's still here. So I want to begin by discussing how did the Gothic novel begin in the first place? And here we go. I mean, essentially, what makes a Gothic novel Gothic? I bring it down to, and this is my theory, I call it the 2 Ds. And what are the 2 Ds? Dread and desire. Push and pull, terror and wonder. I mean, you think about like all the Gothic novels, the really good ones, there's something that you want and you desire it, and whether it's, I'll talk more about tropes in a bit, but whether it's like this really, you know, the dark, seductive lover who may or may not have your best interest at heart, or whether it's the dread of, I'm thinking of Dracula exactly, who kind of embodies both of those, the dread and desire. It's there, and those emotions are definitely at a pull for each other. And it creates something which, if you want to add a 3rd D, we can call it delightful. I think that they're just so much fun if it's really, really well done. A beautifully written Gothic full of dread and desire is a wondrous experience. However, let's add a T, tropes. What is a trope? It's a storytelling device that serves almost as a language unto ourselves. Like we know a trope when we see it. So here's some tropes, and I'm going to go through these really, really quick because I have a lot. Not all is as it appears, subjective experience. Gothics are all about subjective experience. Can I trust myself? Do I trust others? A lot of Gothics are written in first person for that reason, because you really don't know what's going on. Or epistolary novels, like Dracula is an epistolary novel where you have to trust what the person is saying, but do they trust themselves? Supernatural, ghosts, vampires, monsters, whatever else you can think of. Old houses, mansions, castles, sign me up. Spooky atmosphere, graveyards, eerie forests, moors. Extreme weather. It was a dark and stormy night. Storm, fogs, wind, unreliable narrators. Goes back to the first subjective experience. Not all is as it appears. Invalids, consumptives, lots of fainting. It all works. It's like, again, unreliability. Heiresses in precarious situations. Governesses in precarious situations. Demon lover, supernatural or not. Nested stories and narratives. I'm thinking in particular of the 13th Tale, which uses a nested story. So does Wuthering Heights. So does The Lost History of Dreams. I have a nested narrative. Stories within stories. Family secrets and curses. Cursed objects. Family curses. Gothic doppelgangers. Unexplained fires. Think of the fire at the end of Jane Eyre. Like we know how it happened, but there it is. Unexplained disappearances, secret passages, secret rooms, secret shame. That's a big one. That's why people have secrets, because they're ashamed of themselves. Isolation, architectural or natural. Are you in this huge castle or whatever by yourself, or are you out in the moors by yourself? A novel I recently read that I thought handled this wonderfully was Danielle Trussoni's The Ancestor. The protagonist is inside this incredible castle that she's inherited, and she cannot get out. And it's huge, and there's all these secrets. Fainting goes back to invalids, of course. Madness. Mysterious books, mysterious all letters, mysterious footprints, mysterious laughter, mysterious servants, mysterious recluses, mad scientists, virginal heroines, women in white, the more secrets, the better. Men in Black, aka the Baroness hero. Fascination with the medieval and fascination with the macabre, and more. So there's basically a lot for us to work with. This is another important point I'd like to bring up about that Gothic novels reveal a society's anxiety at that particular time in history. So we see the Gothic and the things that it presents as frightening or anxiety producing or even desirable shifts according to what a society thinks at the time. I really think it's an interesting coincidence, but it's not a coincidence that the rise and the birth of the Gothic novel occurred in reaction to the industrial and the scientific revolutions of the 18th and 19th century. Case in point. Who is this gentleman? Horace Walpole, the man considered to have written the first Gothic novel in 1764. It was entitled The Castle of Otranto. He was also an art historian and a politician. He was obsessed with Gothic architecture, and I mean like the real Gothic architecture from the medieval times. Remember the tropes obsession with past times and the medieval times? So he built this amazing house called Strawberry Hill House in Twickenham, which is in London, outside London, to reviving the Gothic style some decades before the Victorians, who were also obsessed with Gothic arts. Particularly, I think about the Pre-Raphaelite art movement, which came about as a result of their love for all things medieval, pre-Raphaelite, before Raphael. So I'm going to give you the start of the synopsis for Walpole's novel, The Count of Otranto. It tells the story of Manfred, lord of the castle, and his family. The book begins on the wedding day of his sickly son Conrad and Princess Isabella. Shortly before the wedding, however, Conrad is crushed to death by a gigantic helmet that falls from him very mysteriously from above. So just from you can tell from this alone, you can tell this story is already going to be crazy sauce Gothic. That's the only word for it. And here's how the first chapter begins. Manfred, Prince of Otranto, had one son and one daughter. The latter, a most beautiful virgin, aged 18, was named Matilda. Conrad, the son, was 3 years younger, a homely youth, sickly and of no promising disposition. Yet he was the darling of his father, who never showed any symptoms of affection to Matilda. Manfred had contracted a marriage for his son with the Marquis of Vincenza's daughter Isabella, and she had already been delivered by her guardians into the hands of Manfred, that he might celebrate the wedding as soon as Conrad's improved state of health would permit. So right off the bat, we can see the following Gothic tropes at work. We have a beautiful virgin, homely youth, sickly, yet he was the darling of his father, who never showed any symptoms of affection to Matilda. What are these tropes? First off, most beautiful virgin. Second, homely youth, sickly, invalid. The third trope is a little trickier, but it's there in the subtext. Yet he was the darling of his father, who never showed any symptoms of affection to Matilda. Family secrets. Other Gothic novels followed, and here's a very, 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 very short list of a few notable ones. You can see there. I think of all of these, it's interesting to me. Melmoth the Wanderer, Sarah Perry used that as inspiration for her Melmoth, which came out a year or two ago. Anne Radcliffe is, of course, well known for The Mysteries of Udolpho, the monk. Interestingly, Mary Shelley's father, William Godwin, wrote a Gothic novel, St. Leon, a tale of the 16th century. And also, interestingly, some believe that her father may have written Frankenstein for that reason. So basically, the Gothic novel became popular enough that Jane Austen took to satirizing the Gothic novel in Northanger Abbey in 1818. But something else also happened in 1818 that shifted the Gothic novel genre in a new direction. And it's something that's been in the news this week quite a bit. I love that they couldn't resist using the pun, Monster 1.17 million. And there's the first edition. And it's kind of ironic in that the first edition of Frankenstein, there was only 500 printed. It was printed anonymously. Some believe that besides her father, that Percy Shelley, her husband, may have written it because he wrote the foreword or the prologue, which was dedicated to Godwin. For the most part, Frankenstein received mixed reviews, though Walter Scott loved it. Well, he liked it. He had nice things to say about it, which I think it's kind of like the publishing version of, you know what? I respect my authors. I'm going to support you, basically. And the other one said, I love this quote. It said, whoever wrote this, the head or the heart of the author, be the most diseased. So how did Frankenstein differ from other Gothic novels? It terrorized readers with its nightmare version of a science run amok. Essentially, Shelley, and by Shelley I'm referring to Mary Shelley, not Percy, created a new genre of science fiction. She was only 16 years old when she began writing it in 1816, and imagine a teenager inventing a whole new genre. I don't know who here has actually read the novel, and I don't mean the movies or the other adaptation. The novel is really different from what most people expect. And here I'm going to say something that others might disagree with. While Frankenstein is indeed a really brilliant examination of what happens when hubris overcomes humanity, shades of Titanic, anybody? Gothic, science versus God, if you will. I think that Frankenstein is really the ultimate cautionary tale of the dangers of bad parenting. So if you've read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. But if not, I will give you a very, very quick overview of where these bad parenting decisions or absent parenting has occurred. Just about every character in Frankenstein experiences some form of parental loss, which affects the choices they make. Victor Frankenstein's mother, Caroline, dies early in the novel, which leads to his fascination in overcoming death. As a result, Victor creates his creation, which he promptly abandons. Bad father, in other words. Other characters in Frankenstein sustain parental loss as well. There's Victor's mother, Caroline. Before she died, obviously, she was an orphan and her father was kind of a ne'er-do-well. So is Elizabeth Lavenza, Victor's fiancée, adopted cousin. Justine, the nursemaid, who ends up taking the fall for the creature's first murder, is abused by her mother after the death of her father. Upon the death of her mother, she also becomes an orphan. So you have these layers of orphans upon orphans, and it's really fascinating to me that you can't help but think that if Victor could have accepted his son, his creature, how different the story might have been. So after Victor abandons his creature after he creates him, who he can't even be bothered to name, the creature goes forth seeking his father. And when the two encounters each other, Victor rejects his creation anew. The creature exclaims, "Hateful day when I received light. Accused creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turn from me in disgust?" And then he says, "There is love in me the likes which you have never seen. There is rage in me the likes of which you will never escape. If I am not satisfied in the one, I will indulge the other." In other words, if you're not going to accept me, meaning the monster, as your child and take care of me, I am just going to lose it and take it out on everybody, which basically he does. The story how Mary Shelley came to write Frankenstein is a saga unto herself. Here's a recap which shows how I believe that, here we go. Her experiences led to my supposition that it's really a book about parental loss and absence. So this is a picture of artist Henry Fuseli's The Nightmare. It's a pretty famous painting, and if any of you have seen, there was a Mary Shelley exhibit about Frankenstein for the bicentennial 2 years ago. It was there in the opening of the exhibit. Fuseli had been involved with Mary Wollstonecraft, who was Mary Shelley's mother, before her marriage to Mary Godwin. And I just bring this up to show you that there's this Gothic sensibility already. So I want to sort of put ourselves in Mary Shelley's shoes. So it's the early 19th century. Mary's mother is Mary Wollstonecraft, the woman who I've mentioned here, the infamous feminist author. Mary never met her mother because Wollstonecraft died of childbirth fever 10 days after giving birth to her daughter. The only way Mary ever knows her mother is from her mother's writings and her reputation, which is a bit salacious. Mary's father, William Godwin, marries a small-minded widow obsessed with humility. When Godwin had financial difficulties, he hits up the poet Percy Shelley for help because Shelley is kind of a member of the aristocracy and supposedly has poet, he has a literary bent. Alas, as soon as the two see each other, Percy and Mary, it's insta-love or insta-lust, if you will, depending on which point of view you want to take. However, Percy was already married with a family, but love must not be denied. During their courtship, Mary and Percy met in the graveyard where her mother, Mary Wollstonecraft, is buried. Rumor has they actually consummated their relationship on the grave. If it's not true, it's a great story. So what are two star-crossed lovers to do? Run away to Europe, of course, which goes as well as can be expected. Mary becomes pregnant and gives birth to a daughter who dies weeks after her birth in 1815. Soon after, Shelley wrote in her journal of a dream where my little baby came to life again, only that it had been cold, and we rubbed it before the fire, and it lived. All of this is backstory to the writing of Frankenstein, and here we have Percy. Mary Shelley famously came up with the idea for Frankenstein during the summer of 1816 while staying with Percy outside Geneva at the Villa Diodati, along with a group I think of as the Diodati gang. Lord Byron, who'd rented the villa, Byron's personal physician, Polidori, who later was considered the first vampire story, and Claire Claremont, Shelley's stepsister who later bore an out-of-wedlock child with Byron. And here's, I don't know if you've ever seen the movie, the Ken Russell movie, Gothic, but you can see how it was inspired by the Fusilli painting. I have to say, I wasn't able to sit through this painting, and I've read so much about Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. It was a little bit too much even for me, but it's interesting how it inspires even there. And here is Russell's depiction of what I call the Diodati gang. There's Percy, Mary, and Polidori. And of course, this is after Mary's child has passed away. It's 1816, and the weather that summer was truly awful. It went down in history as the year without a summer. The eruption of a volcano in Indonesia caused climate abnormalities all around the globe. There were floods, crop failures, extreme rain and snowfall, and a general lack of sunshine. So, stuck inside the Villa Diodati because of the weather, the gang had been reading ghost stories to pass the time. Lord Byron challenged them to write one of their own. And here's some pictures of the Villa Diodati. I actually visited here. So here's what it looks like when you're walking around. And there's the doorbell. You can't go in and visit because it's like a private residence. I think sometimes they have conferences there. So anyway, so Shelley wrote in a preface to the 1831 edition, which was when she was finally able to take credit for her creation, unlike Victor, who never did, that she busied herself to think of a story to rival those which had excited us to this task of writing a ghost story, one which would speak to the mysterious fears of our nature and awaking thrilling horror, one to make the reader dread, and here's the first D, to look around to curdle the blood and quicken the beatings of the heart. She had an acute mental vision while trying to sleep of the pale student of unhallowed arts kneeling beside the thing he had put together, of the hideous phantasm of a man stretched out and then, on the working of some powerful engine, show signs of life and stir with an uneasy, half-vital motion. And here is the first page of the chapter in which the creature comes to life. And it's fascinating to see her handwriting and to consider how fast she must have been writing. It looks very inspired. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. With an anxiety that almost amounted to agony, I collected the instruments of life around me, that I might infuse a spark of being into the lifeless thing that lay at my feet. I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open, it breathed hard, and a convulsive motion agitated its limbs. Thus, Frankenstein's monster and Frankenstein the book had been born and remained in print, helping to support Mary financially after Percy Shelley drowned in 1822. And here's only a small taste of how Frankenstein has appeared in popular culture. This is, I believe this is from the 1823 edition, which was the first one that Mary Shelley was acknowledged as author. I like this. Victor Frankenstein, worst father ever. And of course, I think this is the image most people think of, even though it is quite different from Shelley's description in the novel of the creature. Shelley actually never describes how the creature is animated. It's assumed that it's through galvanism or electricity because Victor mentions the storm. And here are some rather funny covers. I love the kind of 1920s, very Broadway looking Frankenstein or the Madame Prometheus on the left over here. Shelley with her monster. Oh, this one I love. This kid was born on the wrong side of the lab. Oh, you can say that again. And then here's one that's kind of more of the romantic quality of, I suppose this must be Victor walking his way up the Alps with the shadow of the creature on his back. This is a version of the creature from Penny Dreadful. And this, to me, it looks the most like the way that Shelley described the creature in her book, with the long flowing looks and the dun-colored skin and the black thin lips. Finally, here is a statue of the creature in Geneva, which is presented on the Plain Palais, which those of you who read the novels know that that's where the first murder takes place. So they have it there. And here's something funny. It was kind of a meme going around a few years ago that most people don't realize that Frankenstein, if they haven't read the novel, and I mean, I think most people know that Frankenstein refers to Victor Frankenstein, but some people think that it's also the creature. As he drifted away, I can make out his final words. It's okay if you just call me Frankenstein instead of Frankenstein's monster. I really don't mind. So let's jump ahead to the Victorians a little bit. I'm gonna go a little faster here because I know I sort of did a deep dive there. While Mary Shelley's creation was a reflection of the Romantic era from which she lived, the Victorians had other obsessions, particularly the Bronte sisters, whose books included Jane Eyre, Wuthering Heights, and there's Bram Stoker's Dracula, which remains ever popular and immortalized in popular culture. However, let's jump ahead to the mid-20th century, where pulp Gothic novels became especially popular. I can remember being like really, really small and going with my mother into a drugstore, and there were these huge tall racks where they would have these small novels with these book covers that I think you will recognize in a moment. But in the meantime, it's interesting to see how the Gothic novel has really splintered into all these different subgenres. You know, there's Gothic thriller, paranormal suspense, domestic suspense, Southern Gothic horror, and so many others. And but most of all, it's led to a book cover phenomena in the 1970s and 60s and more called Women Running from Houses. So here we go. There's Rebecca. What is she doing? She's running from a house. Mr. Mellon, I remember being given this book by my 5th grade teacher saying, if you like Jane Eyre, you will like this book. She was right, I did like it. And here's a bunch of others. The Haunted, that kind of sums it up. Jennifer Stone had to learn her sister-in-law's unutterable secret, but if the answer lay in a threat to her own life. Lodge Sinister. And all of these come from an amazing, amazing website, which has gone a little defunct, but it's still there, called Women Running from Houses, a Gothic novel reading list. And this is what the person who runs the blog, and her name is not, I don't see it on the blog. I was looking for it, which I really wanted to credit her, but this is the URL, which I hope you will visit because there are tons more there. And some of the covers I got from her website, some of them I remember, like I remember having a copy of Mistress of Melon. And she writes, several years ago, I had the good fortune of stumbling across a collection of 60s and 70s Gothic romance novels at a garage sale. The uses of the term good fortune have nothing to do with the quality of the novels themselves. And I love that she writes, it was her good fortune to learn a previously unknown art form, the art of women running from houses. But now here we are in the 21st century. And I think it's perhaps as a reflection of our increasingly complicated and troubled modern world, the Gothic novel is popular again. I mean, it has been for a few years, but I don't think it's a coincidence that it's now, I don't want to say bigger than ever, but it feels bigger than ever in some ways. Mexican Gothic, this was a book that was acquired as a midlist book, which if you work in publishing, it means like a book that they think will do solid, but they don't expect it to break out. it did break out and became this huge bestseller. It's going to become a movie. The Gothic is also appearing more often in film and television, and I have a few examples of that. So here we go with that. Sarah Waters, The Little Stranger, which I think reflects also the more modern way that Gothics have been approached. I think that there's also more of an emphasis on the subjective reality rather than the objective reality. It's more about, I would say that the neo-Gothic, which is what I like to call it, that it's not so much about ghosts and external perils as much as more subtle and internalized manifestations. Again, it comes back to, can you trust what you see? The fragmented mind, internal crises. And Sarah Waters is a real mistress of this. The last page of this book, people still discuss it, and I'm not going to give it away. You should really read it. It's wonderful. Also, The Ancestor, which I had mentioned earlier, has amazing, amazing setting in it. So I really thoroughly enjoyed that. And it also takes a very unexpected twist that I'm not going to give away, except by telling you there's an unexpected twist. Beloved, Southern Gothic. Melmoth, which was Sarah's Perry reaction to Melmoth the Wanderer from 1820. And you'll get to see a number of books here that are a reaction to other earlier Gothic novels, because I think that the Gothic novel just kind of encourages this sort of dialogue, if you will. And I loved Melmoth. I thought it was really, really wonderful. And Beloved as well as a classic. The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein. Again, this is a book which is in dialogue with Frankenstein itself. It's the story of Elizabeth Lavenza, Victor's fiance, and it's a YA novel, and I have to admit I thoroughly enjoyed. I mean, I love YA. I love everything basically, but I really enjoyed it. Parting the Veil, which has kind of a similar vibe to it in terms of the cover, written by a friend of mine. It's going to come out this November. And here we have domestic suspense, which is also the girl on the train. It's like she can't trust herself because she's been drinking. And Gillian Flynn also, Southern Gothic too, in a way, with her books. The 13th Tale, which has existed stories, and Gothic Doubling. This was another book that really inspired me to write a Gothic of my own. The Widow of Pale Harbor by a friend, Hester Fox, which, again, women running from houses. See how many. It's fun. Once you notice a trope, it's fun to notice them. And here's two that are in dialogue with Dracula. Both versions of Mina's story, and both really wonderful reads. It's just amazing to think that how a book that's been so beloved can have so many different ways that people can respond to it and write about it. And it's interesting that, again, the Karen Essex book has a woman. Now, is she running away from the graveyard or is she running into it? You can't really tell. And I like that ambivalence. It creates a lot of tension. Is it dread or is it desire? Reaction to Jane Eyre. John Eyre by Mimi Matthews. I thought this book was so much fun. I really, really recommend it. Also, Jane Steele. Not what you expect, and also both really fun and really, really well done by authors who clearly adore and know Jane Eyre very, very well. So those are two great, to a novel that's been around almost 200 years. Here are two more that you can see that kind of have similar Victoriana, The Curse of Morton Abbey, which is coming out next month. The Doll Factory, which is set during the Raphaelite time, but is also has sinister overtones to it. And here we are, Crimson Peak. This was a few years ago, but it definitely, here we go. It's on the right. We have a woman running from the house, Raphaelite sensibility, The Dark Demon Lover and Tom Hiddleston, and The Woman with a Secret Behind, Woman in White. It's like, count the tropes. It's fun. And Penny Dreadful, which gathered together just about every character from every Gothic or supernatural novel you could think of from the 19th century, bringing them all together, and really well done too. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I just wish they hadn't ended the series as they had, but I guess that's what happens when you don't create the series yourself. You have no control. And of course, here's my Gothic novel. So here is a very, very, very abbreviated edition of not so much how to write a Gothic novel, but how to think of an idea for a Gothic novel. So if you want to, I don't know if anybody wants to write, but this is how I would break it down. First, choose a time period. And remember that most Gothic novels, even though there's some that are set in present day, a lot of them are set in the past. Especially if you consider that it makes it easier to have all sorts of things go wrong if people can't text each other and say, get out of the house. Choose your tropes. Gothic novels are built upon tropes. It's like, romances are also built upon tropes. There's certain genres that it's just like, if you know your tropes, it's like you shuffle the tropes and you choose which ones and you can tell your story. And if any of you want me to send you a handout with the tropes that I have listed, but you can also just look on tvtropes.com, has a great list. There's lists everywhere. And the more you read Gothic novels, you'll know which tropes you gravitate towards. Like I know myself, I love a good Nessus story. I love a good Gothic doubling. I love, can I trust myself? Things are not as you see. 3, choose your setting. But bear in mind that the tropes you choose in number 2 will inform all of your choices. So if you choose a trope that you are going to set your Gothic novel in an abbey, then that's your setting, because Gothic novels are really about the atmosphere. And 4, choose your characters. Again, also, it's going to be about your tropes. If you choose certain characters that are tropes, such as the invalid or the virginal bride or the dark lover or whatever, it's going to inform what you write. And here's the 5th thing that you can do to get yourself going, is that you can write a sentence description of your Gothic novel, incorporating the choices from 1 through 4. So here, in my case with Lost History of Dreams, my time period was the mid-Victorians. I knew I wanted to be around 1850 because if I did it a little bit later, my character, which I'm going to get to in a moment, he had certain technology that I wanted him to be limited by. 2, choose your tropes. I used a woman who was kind of like I had an invalid that was a consumptive. I had a down in his luck postmortem photographer who isn't exactly a trope, but it's the idea of somebody who's got a past, you're not quite sure what's going on. I also chose like the moldering house on the moors, ghosts, other tropes. 3, choose your settings. House on the moor in Shropshire. And 4, choose your characters, which goes back to the tropes. And then here was mine. This is a very, very short, but it kind of sums up what my book is about. A Lost History of Dreams on the Shropshire moors of Victorian England setting. A postmortem photographer, I don't know if it's a dark secrets trope and character of a Byronist poet's marriage to a consumptive heiress. Trope characters, which reflects the photographer's own troubled relationship with his wife, who may or may not be a ghost. Trope. So there you go. It's a Gothic novel in a nutshell. And from here, I'm going to stop the screen sharing, and thanks for sitting through this. And if anybody has any questions or anything, I know I've thrown a lot at you. Feel free to send them my way.
Well, I think that was just a fantastic presentation. I mean, I never really realized all of the elements that composed a Gothic novel. And as you were listing some of the titles and some of the tropes, I'm going back, and I consider myself personally a lover of historical fiction. But then as you're listing the tropes, I'm like, oh, well, that falls into Gothic, that falls into Gothic. Oh, that might also be Gothic. And then, of course, 13th Tale is one of my favorites. Your book is amazing. I got a sneak peek of Clarissa Harwood's new book.
I love her book. It was so good. So she did such a great job.
And she's with us tonight. So hello, Clarissa. And
yeah,
it's really fun to see a modern writer's take on the Gothic tropes, I think. And I don't know if that's a result of our culture, and a shift. But I think it's it's a really good balance to a lot of possibly the World War II concentration of fiction that we see. So,
well, absolutely. And that's what I couldn't really get into this, but because there's so much you could look upon, like the whole spiritualism movement, it also reflects things that happened in the Gothic novel at that time. I also think like the 1970s reflects what was going on with the women's right movement as well. Like you just see it go back and forth, how they mirror each other. And definitely Mary Shelley, you know, Frankenstein, it's really about anxiety with scientific revolution. So yeah, but you see that time and again. It's fascinating. I had participated in a wonderful panel about the Gothic novel at the Historical Novel Society about 3 years ago, and we were able to get a little bit more into that, and it's just so interesting to see how the Gothic novel reflects our anxieties at that time and how it's shifted in accordance. I mean, you also see that too with romance novels as well. It's just literature is an elastic, ever-changing thing.
It's going to be interesting to see how writers have coped with the pandemic, whether or not the pandemic itself creeps into their writing or the pandemic influences their writing in a new direction as a result of just being locked down and so isolated in a sense. So I'm curious to see where that goes. I mean, maybe we're going to have some more Gothic themed books here in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, I wonder too, especially with the whole concept of isolation and lockdown, because that is definitely a component of domestic suspense. Like, for example, in Danielle Trussoni's book, The Ancestor, there's that element, even though it was written before the pandemic, but it came out during the pandemic, so it seemed like there was kind of a mirroring there.
Or maybe the pandemic might go ahead and breed a whole nother line of literature that we haven't even come across yet. So that could be fun too.
I have to confess that I was working on a middle grade novel when the pandemic hit, and I found that I just couldn't continue for the time being because I really didn't know what the world was going to be like. But I think that with the Gothic, there's a lot more fluidity with that, and it kind of you know, I mean, Mary Shelley wrote a novel about a pandemic called The Last Man. So I think Gothic novelists, if they can imagine it, they can write it. And they will imagine it.
They definitely will imagine it. For those of you who are with us, if anybody has actually, I see pandemic Gothic, someone has put in the comments.
I think I want to forget about the pandemic. I mean, I'm very grateful that we're all vaccinated and we're all, so far, knock wood, remained healthy, but it's been a situation that I would like to put it behind us. I
think so many of us want to just move forward, and like we said at the beginning, we're moving into the spooky season. So
spooky season.
Please go ahead and, you know, if you've got any questions, you can email the library, or I'm sure you could go ahead and reach out through Kris through her website, and she'd be happy to go ahead and see about you know, assisting with any questions you have regarding tropes or Gothic literature. Or maybe some of her upcoming projects. You never know what she might be able to disclose. Again, thank you everyone so much for joining the Pamunkey Regional Library for this presentation. We're hoping to get it a recording posted. Just kind of look out on the Facebook page or website at pamunkeylibrary.org or on our YouTube channel. We would also post it there as well. So Kris, I want to extend my thanks to you again for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about, I mean, what's not to like?
We love talking books in general. We love talking books. You and I can continue a discussion for the rest of the night. So
yes. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.